You are listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 11th of May 2022 on Monocle 24.
Intelligence reports suggest Russia is contemplating martial law. We'll ask how much support Putin retains and if his actions have made Europe more cohesive. In Afghanistan, the Taliban have made rejecting the hijab a criminal offence. Is there anything the rest of the world can do to protect the freedom of women in the country? And a major redevelopment of the Champs-Elysées has been announced. But can city boulevards ever be more than tourist traps? I'm Georgina Godwin. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you live from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. If you're downloading this show on your iPod, that will soon be a thing of the past, as Apple announces the demise of the device. But stay tuned on any device you like, because all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily and I'm Georgina Godwin, and I'm joined today by the journalist and broadcaster Nabila Ramdani and by Somnath Batabyal, who's a lecturer in media and development and international journalism at SOAS. Welcome to you both and congratulations, because you're both dry. How on earth did you manage that? It has been bucketing down in London all day today. Nabila, did you just have weather sense? Did you read the reports, or did you go everywhere by taxi?
I have to say, I was going to come here by public transport and I had to change my mind at the last minute to effectively arrive here dry. But I think we were fooled because we were promised a dry weekend, and yesterday looked like the premise of summer. But this is English weather for you. So. And
Somnath, how did you manage it?
I had a very big umbrella.
But the thing is, don't you find it depresses you? I mean, seasonal affective disorder or whatever it's called, SAD, it's a kind of depression, obviously, that we suffer most in winter. But I think that it can happen just because it's raining.
Nabila and I were having the same conversation just before we walked into the studio, that it really saps your energy.
It does, doesn't it? And can just, I mean, you know, it's a carpenter's quote, isn't it? But rainy days and Mondays really getting you down. But actually, look, I've got some research here. I'm going to find it if I can just access this. I think it says something like, there's one study that says nearly 9% of people fall into the rain haters category. This group feels angrier and less happy on days with more precipitation. But she says in order to get over that, what you shouldn't do is be hiding under your duvet, which frankly is what we all want to do, but actually get out there and walk in the rain. She says however much natural light you can expose yourself to is going to make you feel better.
I think the percentage of rain haters will go up immensely if we do that. More than 9% as we start getting out and really getting drenched.
That's true. Listen, there's a great quote by Anton Chekhov, the Russian dramatist. He says, people don't notice whether it's winter or summer when they're happy. And I think that's very true.
To a certain extent, because conversely, good weather puts you in a good mood.
Yeah.
And so triggers your happiness.
And look, Russian playwrights have rarely been happy, so Chekhov wouldn't know much.
Nobody in Chekhov is ever happy. But let's stay with Russia, because the US Director of National Intelligence has warned that the Russian president will likely impose martial law in the country to support the war in Ukraine, saying that Vladimir Putin may employ more drastic means to keep his war going as he prepares for a prolonged conflict. So, Nabila, I wonder how much support Putin has for the war from within Russia.
Well, I think introducing martial law is part and parcel of Putin's plans to drum up more support for his horrific war in Ukraine at home. Last Monday only, we saw how it was a massive day for Russia when it celebrated its own specific victory over Nazi Germany. And this was, of course, Russia's great patriotic war. And it is one, dare I say, that Vladimir Putin exploited to the full, because he tries to retain support for his aggression against Russia at home. And there is no doubt in Putin's mind that he sees his campaign in Ukraine as a historically important one, and one which fits in with his aspirations to retain a great imperial power. And he believes that Ukraine is culturally Russian, and he, of course, is very keen to steal the grain of Ukraine as well as the Black Sea ports. So it's a hugely important part of the world as far as he's concerned, right on his doorstep. And in order to achieve that, the bloodshed continues, as we see, across the country, not least of all in parts of, in cities such as Mariupol, where the siege seems to go on and on. So he's doing everything possible to rally support at home to keep the war effort going, as Western allies, especially in Europe, are increasingly getting impatient with his behaviour.
Somnath, I wonder what role the mass media plays in convincing the Russian people of the necessity of war. And there was a significant hack on Victory Day. Will that have influenced the population?
Mass media always has played a huge role as far as propaganda goes during war. And this is why countries which are authoritarian are authoritarian always tries to control and centralize mass media. One of the problems Putin is, of course, facing is in this day and age, given that Russian hacks do their jobs all across, he also faces the same weapon against him. And there are incursions into this blanket news coverage which is pro-Kremlin. I think Russians know pretty much that what they are being told is not the whole truth, or not even the partial truth. But given martial law, and it's almost a martial law has already been imposed, the space for dissent is very less.
Nabila, as you were implying, this does seem to be making the European Union stronger. And Emmanuel Macron has been very vocal on the subject.
Well, yes, indeed. He's very concerned about the situation in Ukraine, not least of all because he's the de facto leader of the European Union. France has the revolving presidency for some time now. He sees his German ally, Olaf Scholz, as less charismatic. So he's taking on the lead in order to propose solutions forward to sort out the conflict in Ukraine. And we've seen how he spent a lot of time on the phone to Vladimir Putin. He's still pushing for the diplomatic solution. You know, there's a Churchillian saying that George Orr is better than war. And it has to be said that to a certain extent, you know, all channels need to be exploited. But we're seeing other European allies also seeking solutions, not least of all to buttress their protection against a potential aggression by Russia. Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, is today visiting Sweden and Finland, and he's just a kind of manoeuvring that is inevitable following Russia's aggression on Ukraine. And I think that Russia's attacks on Ukraine challenge the entire balance of power on the continent, on the European continents. And countries like Sweden and Finland are potentially on the front line of escalating Russian aggressions, and in that sense, Boris Johnson is doing something that's pretty routine. It's very frightening, the prospect that Russia could encroach or push its aggression further into the European continent. I mean, what's happening in Ukraine at the moment is bad enough, but the consequences of mass escalation could actually create hell on the European continent and indeed a third world war.
Somnath, who then are Russia's remaining allies? I mean, for instance, where is India on this?
Good Lord, I've been asked this question so many times on India. India has been a fence sitter on this, partly because India finds America to be a very unreliable ally. And America has been an unreliable ally. You know, if we look at Afghanistan, we know why. And also, there's a very long historical conversation which Russia and India has had, post the non-alignment movement. So there's a long history. Russia has also been India's biggest arms exporter. Keeping all of this in mind, India has sat on the fence, and while making it clear that the war should come to an end, I don't think it's a defensible position, but it's a very pragmatic one which India has chosen to go with. And there are countries which, given Russia's energy, is one of the world's biggest energy providers, they have had to, sit on the fence. Even Germany, till very recently, has been importing Russian oil. Russia's imports has surged. The monetary intake has surged post the Ukraine invasion. So blaming certain countries for not joining, yet continuing to take Russian energy, is a strange position. And I'm talking of Western allies in this.
So India is, of course, in a pretty powerful position elsewhere on the geopolitical stage. The fall of Afghanistan, as you said, has heightened this. But is there anything regional powers can do about the latest decree by the Taliban imposing further restrictions on Afghan women? So the ruling was issued by the recently reinstated Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue and Prevention of Vice. And it makes it a criminal offence if women do not wear a burqa in public. Now, Nabila, there's been some argument about language with some media organisations describing it as a hijab, some as a burqa, but it's a very specific kind of burqa. Can you just explain what we mean by this term?
Well, a hijab is what you see in it's effectively a headscarf, a head covering. It doesn't cover the face. It can be used for modesty. It can be worn by all kinds of people from different denominations. You can wear it in a church. You can wear it in a mosque. You can, wear it, in different faiths or no faiths. The burqa is very specifically an Afghan creation, if I may put it that way. It covers the full body. It covers the face, and it has a kind of grid, mesh kind of in the front to see the eyes, and that's the only piece. I mean, that's the only part of the body that is revealed. So it was created in Afghanistan. It's quite it's wrongly used in the French context, for example, when you hear about the burqa ban in France. It's not that. Again, what the French mean by burqa is full face covering, but again, you see the eyes, whereas in the Afghan context, you don't even see the eyes.
It's extraordinary. Well, I mean, what signal do you think this restrictive ruling sends?
Well, I think it's a very, tragically, it's a predictable story about the Taliban, considering that all women now are forced to wear the burqa in public. The Taliban took back control of the country in August last year, and they promised, actually, a softer rule to move away from human rights abuses. But now it turns out that they have already imposed a slew of restrictions on women, banning them from many government jobs, secondary education, and from travelling alone outside cities, outside of Afghanistan, always being flanked by male guardians, whatever they do. So it really is going back to the dark ages for women. And once again, it makes us call into question all the losses of lives and all-round destruction that went on for 20 years in the conflict where the West was involved. And Afghanistan is an absolutely basket case country now. Starvation and disease are huge problems. And yet you have the Taliban focusing on what women wear. It really is horrific.
So Somnath, do we have any choice but to accept the decline in Western values in Afghanistan? Should Western values be imposed?
I didn't like the term Western values be imposed in the kind of blanket sense, but I know where you're coming from. There was a choice that America had not to move out the way they did. There was a choice that all of the Western countries who had been involved in Afghanistan not to do what they did a few months earlier. Look, we can go on blaming what is happening in Russia and Putin. It's horrific. But what the Americans did in Afghanistan was no less horrific. The loss of life, we can carry on about what the Taliban was doing. We knew what they would do. You can keep on saying that the Afghans were capable of defending themselves. We knew they were not. We knew this was going to happen. We let it happen. The choice was there then. Is there something we can do now? Another invasion? No one has the appetite for it. So no. So we have let the country go to hell. We have let the women, the children there just it's a hellish situation. Can Western values be imposed? I think there are many countries in the world, in the global south, where a blanket Americanization or Western values need not be imposed. So in that sense, perhaps not. But what the Taliban are, they're from the dark ages. This cannot be. There's no cultural relativism here. I mean, I understand cultural relativism, but this is obnoxious. And it squarely falls on American and NATO shoulders. People who were there, troops who were there helping out for 20 years, and you suddenly leave. This is on our conscience.
So, there's blame apportionment or there's problem solving. What could the international community do now that might change the Taliban's mind?
Well, I suspect, like in the Ukraine situation, there's always the possibility of sanctions, but we're dealing with one of the poorest countries on earth where starvation is rife, and millions of people, including children, are just don't have food. Beyond that, of course, we can increase diplomatic efforts, and whatever your views on the Taliban, there are lines of communications and they do speak. I suspect we could involve regional powers. It's been mooted that India could come into play, for example. I doubt that Modi's track record in dealing with Muslims can be of any help in the case of sorting out the situation with the Taliban. Modi in itself has been accused of pogroms against the Muslim population when he was governor in India. And his current track record is quite appalling. So I doubt that he's the right person to deal with Afghan Muslims.
And what's your takes on that, with the role of regional powers?
Well, see, India has been a major player, putting out about $3 billion annually and been the biggest regional player in Afghanistan. Despite Modi's track record, and I'm no fan of Modi, I think this goes beyond his own personal convictions and the Hindu right wing. It's more geopolitics where he's involved in. Till very recently, they were trying to send food and food grains to Afghanistan and trying to negotiate with Pakistan. Recently, Pakistan has agreed that India can send 50,000 tons of wheat to Afghanistan, but only Afghan trucks will be allowed to pick it up. So that means 5,000 trucks had to be involved. So Imran Khan has made it as difficult as possible when he was prime minister. But Taliban has shown, not very strangely, but has shown a lot of interest in India stepping into the situation and has been negotiating with the Pakistani government to aid this. So India is a player. How much they will be able to negotiate with Pakistan, given, of course, the situation in Kashmir and Pakistan's and India's new positions on Kashmir. So India can be influential, but India and Pakistan have to be on a semblance of kind of conversation to negotiate this. Otherwise, the lines are cut off.
Now, it's not just what women may wear. It's also that they might not go out at all unless they're accompanied by a male guardian, and then only for essential business, meaning that activities seen as normal in the West are completely banned to them now. A simple evening promenade down a city street is out of the question. Well, now, that's a tradition that's long existed in France, where a stroll along the Champs-Elysées has been enjoyed for generations by locals and tourists alike. But the main Parisian boulevard is about to get an overhaul. Let's hear from Etienne Rio, who is Director of Applied Research and Innovation at PCA Stream, the architecture practice in charge of the project, announced earlier today. He spoke to Monocle's Carlotta Rebello.
The vision is first that it is an iconic avenue for French people, but also for international tourists who are coming in within the city. But for Parisians, it was a little bit a deceiving destination for a decade. And so we had to rethink about what should be the Champs-Elysées of the future. And the project now is to focus on the feasibility of changing the Champs-Elysées regarding major objectives. The first one is to re-enchanting the Champs-Elysées, to make it a new destination for Parisians but also for foreigners, and to be sure that it will be fit for the future. So we have to reinvent the destination in terms of aesthetics, in terms of walkability, in terms of rewilding a little bit. It means to be sure that nature will be nurtured, and also to provide new services and to attract people to this avenue. It has to be like a showcase of what should be an avenue in a very dense city like Paris is in the 21st century, when we have to tackle the challenges of environmental transition, of how to also be sure that it would be a timeless renovation. So it's really important for us to be sure that it will be done in a very good way. And the initiative, the Champs-Elysées initiative right now, is a two-time initiative. There is what the city of Paris will do before the Olympic Games of 2024, and PCA Stream is in charge of redesigning the Champs-Elysées for the time after the Olympic Games.
And I should say, if you want to check out Paris for yourself, there's no better time to go than for our Quality of Life conference, which is happening there from the 2nd to the 4th of June. Fabulous lineup, and all details, of course, from our website. Nabila, how do you feel about the Champs-Elysées in its present state? I mean, you grew up in Paris. What do you make of these plans?
I absolutely grew up in Paris, not so much on the Champs-Elysées, but I approve of those plans. I think, making a city and a specific avenue that's known around the world more beautiful, there's nothing that, why would anybody object to that effectively? But I think that the Champs-Elysées remains a showpiece avenue, as your correspondent was saying in his report. Its cosmetic beauty is effectively what's left of Imperial France. And in my opinion, it still remains skin deep, as it were. It doesn't really represent the soul of the French Republic or indeed Paris itself. I think the Champs-Elysées in many ways is a myth. It's a modern street that has far more in common with vast American boulevards than traditional Paris streets. I mean, the Americans love it because it's designed for large cars, huge department store and fast food outlets. And it's very American also because it lacks intimacy. So rather than delightful, pretty pavement cafe, it's actually full of canteen-style mega meal cafes. So it's not the Parisians' Paris, if you like. It was traditionally also designed for great armies to march on the Champs-Elysées and indeed to fire their artillery at ordinary people when Parisians misbehave. And it remained the case because I attended some epic riots by the Gilets jaunes on the Champs-Elysées over the last 5 years of Macron's past presidency. And they are absolutely astonishing in their ferocity. And rioters were attacking the global brands and the super wealth on the Champs-Elysées because that's what it represents.
Yeah. So now I wonder, we heard there Nabila talking about Paris's imperial past. And I know that you grew up in Calcutta. And I wonder how much of the imperial past is left there. And if that is something we should be absolutely rejecting and moving away in the way that we reject, statues of Cecil Rhodes or Colston and so on.
It's an interesting one. And Nabila, you've touched on all the things that I've been thinking about since, as we were talking about Paris and Champs-Elysées. It reminds me of Roland Barthes' mythologies. Myths are created. And Champs-Elysées was one of those myths we grew up with. Like, even before I ever came to Paris as a 24-year-old, we had known to love Paris, seeing Breathless or Funny Face or much later Amelia. Three Colors Blue, Juliette Binoche. And, I was telling Nabila that I've always been in love since then with Juliette Binoche. So you kind of have this myth of Paris. But then I also saw La Haine much later, and we understand the deconstructing of the imperial past and what they do to great cities. Calcutta, you say, an esplanade, this grand big road which was meant for Queen Victoria's commemoration to come down when she came to Calcutta to kind of ordain this city is hers. So while there is something to be said about aesthetics and beauty, Paris is also a hugely segregated city, as the hatred just showed to us in 2005, the riots which Nabila you just spoke about. So for me, these big imperial cities need to be inclusive, and Paris is one of the most unintegrated clear divide. Unlike London, where you have council housing and the big housing together, Paris is very different. Its beauty is unending and therefore can be a bit brutal. Yeah.
I'm going to give you 30 seconds each to tell me how you would design the perfect boulevard, Nabila.
Certainly with no big stores. That makes a city more... I like cities to be more intimate. And the Champs-Elysées is the exact opposite of that. It's vast and yes, a bit cold.
I would love narrow streets, where no armoured trucks can come down and we can walk again holding hands.
Oh, isn't that lovely? With Juliette Binoche.
Oh!
Well, I personally hope that any redesign of major cities includes some provision for slow-moving pedestrians looking at their phones. And we're all looking at our phones a great deal more, particularly since Apple has announced that it's discontinuing its music player, the iPod Touch, bringing to an end a device widely praised for revolutionising how people listen to music. Are we sad about this news? Do we care, even?
No, I'm not sad at all. And I don't understand the usage of iPods nowadays. You know, they were always very small and fiddly in the first place. And the smaller, the better, apparently, as far as the technology goes. But they were always very difficult to manipulate and massively frustrating to use. And one of the joys with the development of technology that comes with the Apple iPhone, for example, is you can have all sorts of devices on your phone, including one to play music, for example. So the iPod has become kind of redundant in that respect. So I'm not terribly sad about its disappearance, to be honest.
What do you feel?
See, I never had money for a Walkman, so iPod remains kind of very close to me. That, you know, I did buy one very quickly, and a big clunky one. And I remember the kindness of this lady in Apple, which I normally, you know, you don't, in big stores, you don't get this. My iPod broke, and all my music for several years was on it. And when I went up to her and I said, I cannot buy another one and I cannot transfer the music, there was no cloud system that says. She very quietly told me a hack to break into the iPod and be able to retrieve all my music. And this is from a woman working in Apple who told me how to crack the Apple system.
How? Because we're all going to lose our iPods. We need to be able to know. All right, we
This
tell
was
me
many,
later,
many,
right?
many years ago.
Are there any other pieces of really old technology that you still hold on to? I mean, for instance, I've still got a tape deck because I've still got a lot of my early work on cassette players. Oh. Sadly, I don't have a reel-to-reel because that's how old I am. I remember slicing tapes with a razor.
Yes. VHS, you know, the old films, Breathless I mentioned, I'd seen that on a VHS tape. And vinyls, which still remain with us, you know. So those are the two things I like to hold on to. Vinyls, definitely, just because of the quality of the music.
And they're coming back, of course.
And they are coming back in a big way. And some of those old VHS tapes, you know, they remain very close.
What about you, Nabila?
I really miss the days when taking photographies really meant something because there was so much hassle involved, including developing films and getting copies. But, I mean, astonishingly, we were doing all this less than 20 years ago. And it really meant something to take pictures and get them developed and, you know, and store them and in albums and look at them. And now you literally have billions of pictures taken every day. It's like an overload of photographies. We have so many that they tend to become a bit worthless. And that, I think, is a bit sad.
I wonder if either of you use a Kindle.
You know, I keep trying. I have a Kindle and I keep buying books, and then I buy the books in hardback again because I would love to be a Kindle reader because I think it's the correct thing to do. And it doesn't take any space. But I still can't get over the physical aspect of a book and the beauty of a cover. But it's the wrong thing. You know, the environment shouldn't pay for art. I understand that. Like I shouldn't eat meat. I understand. But I do bad things and I feel guilty, but I still keep buying it.
Nabila, what about you?
I feel the same about books and indeed newspapers. It's a different kind of enjoyment. The digital experience, in my view, is quite different, and you can be drawn into different, you know, pages, different sites, whereas a book and indeed an edited newspaper gives you a sense of focus. And some people have worked on it to highlight important stories. So it's the product of somebody making decisions to project some stories rather than others, and that's what you're buying and you reading analysis and a projection of an editorial decision, and that's what you don't get online. You end up being dragged into the internet's various allies.
Speak for yourself. Somnath's reading high-minded pieces on the thing. I'm going to leave you both to read whatever it is you want to do on your journey home, and I very much hope that it's dry for you. That's Nabila Ramdani and Somnath Batabyal. Thank you both very much for joining us.